Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today in this exciting lecture from Ashleigh Whiffin, who is a museum curator and Carrion Beetle specialist. Let me tell you a little bit about the Linnean Society, which is the world's oldest active society devoted to natural history, founded in 1788, and we're still very, very active, working not just on the botanical, zoological, and library collections we have from Carl Linnaeus in the society, but also with the continuing, we're trying to continue the importance of the collections as primary reference for the naming of plants and animals on the planet. Our vision in the Linnean Society is of a world where it's understood, with nature is understood, is valued, and is protected. Hence, we're inviting people like Ashleigh to give us some knowledge on the natural world. And we want to do this aiming to inform and to involve and inspire people like you about nature and the significance through the collections, through the events in the society, which you're more welcome to check in the website, and the publications that we produce. So thanks to the wide ranging of expertise of our fellowship and the unique collections, we are a hub for science communication through learning and engagement working together. So the society is encouraging the debates and discussion about natural history in different disciplines. So we strongly support all efforts to address some of the most urgent issues facing the natural world, such as, you know, the planetary emergency, the climate change, and the biodiversity loss. So today, I have the pleasure of having Ashleigh, my colleague Ashleigh Whiffin, who is, as I said, a museum curator and a Carrion Beetle specialist, who is going to introduce us to the delightful world of decomposers, digs deeper into the complex ecology, and highlights some of the current work to conserve, to protect these important beetles. Ashleigh is based in Edinburgh, and she is an entomology curator at the National Museums of Scotland, helping to manage a collection of over 2.5 million insects. She's also a founder and co-organizer of the National Silphidae recording scheme. And obviously you will see she is a very passionate person about advocating for insects and especially beetles. Okay, Ashleigh, so over to you. And thank you so much for joining the Society, for bringing all your knowledge to us. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Blanca, and thank you for the invitation to be here, and thank you everybody for joining. I apologize in advance. I know it's lunchtime, so I do hope that you are fully prepared for what the kind of topic is today. I haven't got any really gruesome pictures in here though. I hope by the end of it that you'll understand why I'm so passionate about these beetles. So let's get stuck in. Firstly, for me, why? It actually came about through my studies of forensic science. So at the time, I thought I might be more interested in, becoming a crime scene investigator. I really liked fingerprinting. I watched a lot of CSI actually as a teenager. That's probably the result of that. But I went to study this, and it was during my second year that I was actually exposed to forensic entomology. And this really turned my head towards insects. I had no idea that insects could be used to solve crimes. So I actually specialized in my third year and did a project on insect succession. So this was monitoring the different insects that come at different stages of the decomposition process. So this was also my first time ever really properly identifying insects and preserving insects, starting my own collection. And this was kind of my first foray into the museum world as well. It was brilliant. I really enjoyed that. So I actually went to go and pursue a master's in entomology, was forced to move away from the death and decay slightly and worked on ladybirds for a bit. But then I actually came to Edinburgh for a job at the university working on burying beetles. So this image in the top left here is of some of the cultures that I was helping to rear and plan and implement experiments with. So I couldn't escape the burying beetles. And really, why would I want to? Because they're such a fantastic group. Now, globally, the family Silphidae only has about 200 species in. So for me, this was a really nice small family because when we talk about beetles, we've got over 400,000 different kinds of beetles, different species of beetles in the world. So a family of 200 is nice and manageable. So yeah, it was nice and a small group for me to get stuck into. But also they are just quite diverse for quite a small family. So the majority of them are carrion feeders, but you've got predatory species in here. You've got some that are actually vegetarian. You've got others that are even parasitoid carrion beetles. And some of them are remarkably beautiful. So like this incredible species here on the left, Necrophylla formosa. This is an Asian species, absolutely dazzling, because who says you can't look gorgeous while feeding on dead animals? Now, I will use the word Silphidae to say the family name. It is still the family name, but maybe for not much longer. So anyone that's a taxonomist in the audience will be familiar with this recent work, but there was a phenomenal publication that came out earlier this year that actually proposed major changes to the current beetle classification, which rather painfully for some of the sylphid workers sinks the Silphidae family within the Staphylinnidae, and this is the rove beetles. So this means that my family I work on is now demoted to a subfamily. Yeah. But don't worry, for now we're going to be sticking with the word Silphidae as the family. It takes a little bit of time for the community to fully accept these changes, and there'll be a lot of cabinets and drawers of specimens that require some relabeling. But away from that, let's look in more detail at these fantastic beetles. I like to call them nature's undertakers, and that's because most of the group are associated with carrion. We'll come to some of those others later on, but let's focus at those first. So we've got 21 species of carrion beetle recorded from Britain and Ireland, where I'm based. And so they are, in that nature of feeding on dead stuff, really important within our environment, within our landscapes. They're essential decomposers. They're helping break down all that organic waste matter. And of the burying beetles, we've got 6 species. So these are the iconic red and black ones, like you can see here. They've got the clubbed antennae, which are fantastic at detecting that decay, sulfurous compounds released during decomposition. And they're also sometimes termed sexton beetles. So burying beetles and sexton beetles is their common name. Now, you may have heard about some of their behaviours, and the thing that puts them on the map really and makes them so special is this biparental care. So it's not just the female caring for the offspring, it's both male and female working together to prepare the resource, to prepare that carcass that they find, and to raise the offspring. So it's really remarkable, quite rare among insects for this kind of behaviour to happen. So it's very heavily studied. There are many university groups working on these beetles, looking at this incredible behaviour. So that's something that I was doing when I was at Edinburgh University. So let's look in depth a little bit more about this gruesome behaviour, which is absolutely fascinating. So when you've got something like a dead mouse or a dead bird out in the environment, these beetles will locate that corpse, and then they'll work together. A male and female will actually excavate soil from under the body. Slowly the carcass will sink down into the earth, and it's covered over and concealed. Now, they're doing this because carrion is a very ephemeral resource. It's desirable to many other scavengers too. So not just insects, you've got vertebrate scavengers like foxes, but then you have got the invertebrate scavengers too. So blowflies and other groups of beetles, all very interested in that carcass. So by concealing it underground, they're securing that resource for themselves and then using it to rear their family. So they do this, they're well equipped, the parent beetles, with these really strong mandibles. So that helps them to mold the carcass, to strip it of any fur or feathers. So they've got good contact with the skin there, and they mold it into a ball shape. They'll then actually create a crater in the top, and this will be where the larvae will eventually sit and be fed by the parents. And it really is a nest underground, very much like bird chicks in a nest. These larvae are then going to be fed in this lovely carcass setup. And hopefully some of my video clips work for you, so you can see a burying beetle parent here in action, tending to some of its offspring. And you can see that this was a mouse carcass in this video clip. It's kind of unrecognizable now. They've really gone to great lengths to prepare it into this nest structure. And here's a close-up of an adult beetle feeding its young. And so what they've done is they have molded that carcass. They have actually included some preservatives to help make sure that this resource lasts as long as possible. They have oral and anal secretions which contain antimicrobial properties, which actually slow down the decomposition and help to work against other competitors like bacteria and fungi. But some more recent research has actually shown that these secretions even help conceal the scent of the carcass, and even actually help to prevent competition of the other burying beetles in the area. So really remarkable. Now, the larvae aren't capable of producing any audio cues like bird chicks do, but they will do tactile begging. So they'll reach up and they'll touch the parents on the face, and that's their form of communication and requesting more food. So usually successful offspring will be the ones that acquire more food, so begging is beneficial for them. But actually some studies have shown that if the larva begs too much, the parent might cull it. So it's a very fine line as a burying beetle larva. Now, the adults are capable of audio communication, so they actually stridulate, which might be surprising. So they'll actually create a very squeaky noise, and I've got a little clip of this for you. And they do this by using this plectrum. So if you can see in the center of this image on the abdomen, there's a couple of lines there, and this is called the pars stridens. So it's like a series of ridges, a little stridulatory file. And then on the tips of the underside of the wing cases, there are some hairs. So the beetle moves its abdomen in and out past these hairs, causing this sound to be produced. So hopefully you can see this little video clip and hear this. Maybe turn your volume up at this point. And many thanks to my friend John for providing this clip. So hopefully you heard that. I'll actually play it again for you. Oh, I won't. So it's very squeaky. And the adults actually have 3 types of stridulation that they can produce. So you've got the defensive stridulation, you've got a courtship stridulation, and then also once the larvae are old enough, when they're in the later instars, they can actually move about the carcass and feed on their own. So the parents have a parental stridulatory call that they will then signal to the offspring to come back if they then want to do some direct feeding. So 3 types of stridulation, pretty remarkable for these beetles. I don't speak carrion beetle, but I would hazard a guess that this was probably the defensive stridulation. Now, a question that we are frequently asked about burying beetles is, what are those hitchhikers? So these small things on the back of beetles are actually phoretic mites. They're not the offspring, they are mites that are just hitching a lift. And I like to think of it as they've hopped aboard the beetle bus. And that's because they are primarily using the beetle as a form of transportation, which is pretty clever. Now, it's previously been considered that this relationship is mutualistic, because these mites are actually looking to feed on fly eggs and larvae that are on the carrion. So using the beetle as transportation, the beetle's then getting a helping hand by having some of the competition eradicated once they get to the carcass. But actually, it has also been shown that these mites can feed on the burying beetle eggs too. So this relationship isn't as clear-cut as people once expected it to be. And actually, sometimes you can encounter these beetles really overwhelmed with a very large load of phoretic mites, as you can see in these photos here. And that could actually cause problems for mobility for the beetle and also temperature regulation. So yeah, they're not always a good thing. And you can see as well on the left-hand side here that this is not a burying beetle. This is another carrion beetle, the red-breasted carrion beetle. And these mites actually will go on the non-burying species as well. So we've looked at those carrion feeders, but I do want to touch on some of those that are in the family Silphidae that aren't carrion feeders, and that's the predatory species. So this charming little black beetle here is actually a really feisty predator. It's a predator of snails. So this one we've named the common snail hunter. It actually comes in 2 colour forms. You've got a black colour form and a red colour form. And you can see it's got a really small, skinny head. So this narrow head is really important because it's going to feed on snails. So here is a fantastic image from Maria. I really, really love this photo of this species. It's incredible. So this really well adapted beetle with that narrow head is able to get right into the shell there and feast on the snail within. But it's also equipped with some digestive enzymes. So similar to our glowworms that we have in the UK, it's going to bite the snail and it's going to release those enzymes that start to break down the flesh of the animal so it can slurp it up. Yeah. hope you aren't eating right now, but really fantastic behavior. And I haven't actually witnessed this yet myself, so I'm counting down the days and waiting to be able to see this in action. Another predatory species that we have here in the UK is the caterpillar hunter, Dendroxina quadrimaculata. Now, this is a specialist on oak, where it hunts caterpillars that are feeding on the oak leaves. It's a little bit under-recorded, I would say, in the UK, and that's because it's mostly going to be found up in the kind of higher canopy areas, so not as accessible for recorders to find and photograph. But it's a really distinctive species with this beautiful chestnut-coloured elytra and these 4 spots on the wing cases. And again, a very successful predator. Now, when you think about carrion beetles, you don't think about pollination, do you? Well, I'm sure you've heard of some of the plants that actually utilize carrion insects for pollination. It's usually blowflies, but actually there's a remarkable plant called the Titan arum, which is native to Sumatra, that has this incredible inflorescence. And I was really fortunate to find out more about this through collaborating with the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh. So they have some of these in their glass houses, and it was very exciting when we found out one was going to flower. We never expected a carrion beetle to visit this flower though. So it has been speculated that carrion beetles are one of the main pollinators in Sumatra of this plant. And you can see on the left-hand side, this is one of those species. This is Diomysis osculans, a rather old specimen from our collection. And one of its relatives that we get in the UK is Necrodes littoralis. So this beetle did actually get attracted to the plant at the Botanic Gardens a few years ago when it bloomed. So very, very exciting. This plant releases that scent of decay and rot, and it managed to trick this beetle into arriving there. Unfortunately, there's not many other of these plants around in Edinburgh. So yeah, but not actually any active pollination happening here, but exciting nonetheless. And I just want to say, like, can you imagine a world without decomposers? Again, lunchtime, sorry folks, but it would really be quite horrendous. We would be wading through fields of death and decay. It would be very unhygienic, very unpleasant. Not to mention smelly. So these insects, the beetles and the other carrion insects like your blowflies, are really essential in helping break down all that organic matter and provide this really important service for our environment. It's really helping to recycle all that nutrients. And I like to, you know, sing the Lion King and sing Circle of Life, but I'm not going to do that right now for you. And let's talk about conservation. So you may be familiar with a very special American species of burying beetle, the American burying beetle, Necrophorus americanus. There's been a huge conservation effort placed on this species. It's one that is at risk of extinction. It's undergone some dramatic declines. It actually has, it only occupies 10% of its historic range now. So previously it was known from 35 states across the US, and now it's really just clinging on to some of the eastern areas. So what's been happening is that there is a huge conservation effort led by the US Fish and Wildlife Service in partnership with several zoos, and they have been breeding populations to release into the wild, bolster that wild population. I was really fortunate a few years ago to go to St. Louis Zoo and have a really magical experience. It was probably my favorite ever insect interaction, and hold an American burying beetle, which was really, really fantastic. Such a nerd. But it's really important to think about this, because this is one of our largest carrion beetles. In North America, it is the largest carrion beetle. I actually have a couple of specimens here to give you an idea of size. It's between 30 to 35 millimeters in size. I don't know if you can see this clearly enough right now, some historical specimens. And so because it's a very large beetle, it requires larger carrion to successfully reproduce. Now, it was previously considered its declines be based on the fact that the passenger pigeon went extinct, and that was one of its primary food sources. But actually, a bigger factor now is habitat fragmentation. So because it is a bigger beetle and it's requiring a bigger food source, it's directly competing with some of those other scavengers, the vertebrate scavengers like foxes. And the beetle is less well equipped to compete against those larger animals. So habitat fragmentation is a huge problem. So as well as boosting the numbers by releasing more individuals into the environment, linking up, connecting areas of good quality habitat is going to be really important for the recovery of this species. Now, we don't know as much about conservation requirements of carrion beetles in the UK. So something that I decided to do in 2016 was get a little group together to actually run a recording scheme. So I don't do this alone. There is a team of us. I work with Richard Wright, coleopterist, and Matthew Esch, another coleopterist, who was actually doing his master's research on carrion beetles in the UK at the time that I met him. And so we formed this scheme to really just try to encourage more recording of these beetles within the UK, therefore boosting what we know about the distribution and populations of these species. And so it's been a fantastic experience. It's been overwhelming, like the participation that we've had so far. We've run lots of in-person workshops, which are great fun. Always the carrion trapping element is the best bit. But we've also been up and down the country attending conferences and taking boxes of live beetles on a dead mouse to conferences. That always goes down well. But it's been great. And the sole aim here is to get more records coming in so that we can really get a better grasp of the situation. So we produce some freely available resources. So we've got an identification key, which you can access via the UK Beetle Recording website. And we also have a social media account where we provide tips and tricks on how to identify beetles, as well as just sharing some really interesting records, as well as some brilliant images. We've also, in more recent years, done some virtual workshops. So these are all available online. If anyone's interested in learning a little bit more about identification of these carrion beetles, you can head over to YouTube and find these this selection of them there. But another really big part of this challenge, this voluntary challenge as well, I should say, that all three of us do this just in our spare time. I have been going up and down the country extracting historic records from collections. Now, obviously, I'm sat within a collection right now, so I'm very fortunate that as part of my day job, I was able to focus a little bit on carrion beetles, and I databased our collection that we have here at National Museum Scotland. But it also required a huge effort to go to visit other collections and extract data from there too. So these collections are absolutely vital. Collections are such an important resource. They provide a window to the past, really, so we can actually pinpoint where species occurred, when, where, and look at those distributions, how they're changing now. And having those physical specimens is really, really important because it enables us to go back and check identifications, even do some genetic work now. So it's really important. And I've had a great time visiting other collections. Museum curators love going to nerd out in with other curators and in their stores. It's been brilliant, but it's been a long process. There's been lots of records to extract, and there's still many more to do. And I've had a few people help me with data extraction too, so I'm very, very grateful to them for giving me a helping hand. And it's really important that we've had these historic records to actually then be able to compare with the modern day records too. And what this has enabled is actually the production of a book. So I was incredibly fortunate a couple of years ago to be invited by Steve Lane, who is our UK hysterid expert, our clown beetle expert, to work on this publication with him, and also Colin Lucas. So it was really with the aim of trying to make these two beetle groups more accessible to people and provide a resource that was going to have not just identification keys and distribution maps, but lots of information about ecology, phenology, and then also an update on their conservation statuses too. So we've got lots of new keys in the book. I will say that the clown beetle keys are excellent. I used them just the other week, identifying some of my recent fieldwork material. And then here's an example of one of the pages of the species accounts. So we have lots of information here, and then of course dots on maps as well. Now, of course, when you produce something like this, it does immediately go out of date. So it kind of provides a bit of incentive for recorders to go out and say, yeah, this species definitely occurs near me. I can put a dot on this map. And of course, when records are submitted to us, the active online maps will all be updated as well. So all our records feed through to the National Biodiversity Network. So those maps will be in live time. But hopefully this has provided a bit of an incentive for people to get out and prove that certain species do occur in certain areas. Because undoubtedly what we do know at the moment, there's going to be a little bit of a bias on. So let's look at that. So this is our scheme data so far. The scheme holds just over 32,000 records at the moment for carrion beetles. And you can see that there is a distinct difference here between kind of the pre-1989 and post-1990. And we do think that there's definitely a little link here between the types of trapping that people do. So definitely like light trapping has become more popular in recent years, and even pitfall trapping for scientific research has become more popular and more commonplace too. So this could account for some of this increase in record numbers coming in. And then if we look at this here, we've got the maps on the map on the left hand side here is showing our sylphid records per hectare, and inevitably in Britain and Ireland we've got this bias for the south, particularly south of England. It's very well recorded. We've got many more recorders in that area compared to the north of Scotland, so we have got this recorder bias, so not necessarily actively portraying distributions. So but by gathering all this data we're able to know this now. And we can see that the numbers of sylphid records are increasing rapidly, which is really great, really great. And actually, it could be that the carrion beetles are the best recorded group of Coleoptera in the UK now. So I'm pretty happy with that. So we are able to now look at the conservation of these beetles by going back and looking at the museum collections. We've been able to go and pinpoint exact locations where beetles last occurred. So we know that this species here, Silpha carinata, it's actually last recorded in 1985. So it's believed to be possibly extinct now in Britain, but without going back and checking at these sites, we don't really know. Now, unfortunately, some of these sites are on private land, but we've been very fortunate to work with the landowners and go back and revisit some of these sites. No success yet, but watch this space because we are going to plan for some more visits in the coming years. So hopefully we can prove that some of these beetles actually do still exist, and then maybe help with guidance on how to nurture those remaining populations. Now, when it comes to trapping, there are several different ways that we can trap and monitor carrion beetles. Don't worry, they're not all grotty. I'll show you the worst ones first. So here we've got some buried, we've got examples of buried carrion and pitfall traps. Actually, I haven't got the buried carrion photo in, I don't think, but we've got a lovely pitfall trap here set by Matt Esch, and he's got a mouse corpse hanging from the roof of the trap. Now, you might wonder why we need a cage. Now, as I've mentioned, there are many other animals that are interested in carrion. So to avoid tampering from those other scavengers, you do need to have some kind of barrier method so that your bait isn't stolen, and also so that you don't end up harming any other wildlife. So if you ever do any bait trapping with carrion or anything else, you want to make sure that you don't accidentally catch a small mammal in your trap. So we would always have a cage around the outside, or if you have a pitfall trap sunk within the ground, you can put a wire mesh over the top. So this is going to lure in any beetles in the nearby area, and they're going to fall into the cup, and then they can then be collected by us and identified. Other methods involve hanging traps. So these are slightly better in that they are less accessible to those other scavengers, to those competitors. So you've got ones like this, which are kind of a vein trap on the top, so it funnels the insect in, goes down into the container, which has got the bait, and then they're trapped within there until you then empty the trap and release them. I do prefer to do live trapping so that you know, I am able to just identify things in the field and release them. That's not always possible if you're working with remote locations, but definitely for working on this group, it's not essential to retain physical specimens. Photos are enough, which is great. Now, another thing about carrion beetles and monitoring them is that you just need to be a bit opportunistic. Always carry gloves and be prepared to get stuck in. So those of us that work on carrion beetles are sometimes termed serial flippers, and that's because we spend a lot of time flipping carcasses. So very opportunistic. At any point that I get, if I find some roadkill or anything out and about, I will have a poke around to see if there are any carrion beetles. Now, obviously, health and safety does have to come first. So as always, gloves are essential, and of course, at this current time, there should not be any tampering with wild bird carcasses because of the severe bird flu epidemic that we're facing. But I'm here with a badger carcass, not a bird, so definitely had to check that one out. As mentioned, they're not all gruesome, the ways of trapping for these beetles. So many of the species are attracted to light. So you can see we've got our 6 species of burying beetle here and 2 of the non-buryers that are attracted to light. So this is a really nice clean method for monitoring carrion beetles, or at least these 8 species. And they're attracted to light in the same way that moths and many other insects are. The majority of these will get within the light trap, but actually this smaller one here, Phosphigratata, that's the common snail hunter. It's flightless, so you may find it underneath the trap or on the ground sheet. It doesn't tend to get into the trap. But you can run a light trap then to monitor these beetles, and we would absolutely love your records if you do. We've been working a lot with the Moth Trap Intruders group on Facebook, run by Steve French. So very many thanks to him for his work promoting these beetles too, and all the other wonderful insects that get attracted to light, because there's a huge diversity, which is really incredible. So we've been working a lot with the local moth recorders. We've been working with Butterfly Conservation to try and see if we can entice some of their volunteers and members to start recording carrion beetles too, pointing them towards those resources so that they can identify them themselves, and utilizing social media to really just promote these beetles as much as we can. So this is my plug to you to please do help us and record carrion beetles. We really do need to continue this monitoring work so that we can monitor those changes and then really know more about what's going on with these species. This is not something that's restricted to scientists. Anybody can get involved with this, and it's super easy to use. I definitely recommend using iRecord for submitting your records. They come straight to us that way. But there are other means of doing this too. We do get the records that come in via iNaturalist. So if you're an iNaturalist user, please carry on sending in your records there. They will get to us. You can also contact the scheme via our email address, which is on the website. And if you'd rather send us spreadsheets of records and ad hoc records, that's absolutely fine. Whichever you are more comfortable with, feel free to just send them to us that way. But it's really important in sharing those observations. It helps support research and decision making, both at local and national levels. And we need this support now more than ever. We really need to speak up for our struggling biodiversity. And it's worth also saying that all the records are valuable. So if you've got a common species, don't just discount it and think, oh, that's common, that doesn't matter. We really need to be making the effort to record across the group, across all those different kind of scarcities and common statuses. So please record all of them. And of course, if you've got anything that you're unsure of, you can always get in touch with us. So do give us a follow on social media. We have a Twitter account, which is Silphidae UK, and also I heavily promote beetles on social media too. So you're welcome to get in touch and ask about carrion beetles anytime. And if you haven't heard enough just now, I will wax lyrical about carrion beetles at any given opportunity. So there are a few podcasts which I have been fortunate to be a guest on. So there are these ones below. Feel free to go and check them out. They're all available on Spotify. And I'll also talk a lot more about insect collections within those podcasts too. So if you're interested in carrion beetles or museum collections, have a little listen to some of these podcasts. And with that, I will leave my contact details on the screen. So if anybody has any questions they're not sure they want to ask right now, or if they think of them later on, feel free to get in touch. But I hope that that's given you a nice overview of the group. Hopefully you can see now why I love these beetles so much, and see why they are so important and unfortunately often underappreciated.
Thanks, Ashleigh. Blanca, would you like to go to the Q&A?
Hi. Yes, I'm ready. Hi. Thank you so much, Ashleigh, for the really nice talk. Very enjoyable, and yeah, well, I'm sure you got more fans on the Beetles now. We got a good number of questions. At the moment in the panel. So I'm going to start with one of the questions from Avishikta. Excuse me, the pronunciation. The first question is, what kind of relationship does the mites and beetles have?
Yeah, so I did touch on that. It is a little bit unclear. So I mentioned that there was this mutualism that people believed existed, but actually they might be detrimental to the beetles in some cases. So if there wasn't enough fly eggs or larvae on that carcass and the beetle had come in with a heavy load of those mites, the beetle would then lay its eggs and those mites would still be around. So they would be seeking out some food and they would use the beetle eggs if there were no fly eggs or larvae present. So yeah, it's not always a beneficial relationship as people previously thought.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Yeah, so we have another question from Perry. Is most of my recording is from moth traps. How many UK species from this group are regularly attracted to light?
Yeah, so you might have seen my illustration there with 8 species. Of those 8 species, there are 4 that are very, very frequently found at moth traps. Our number 1, I believe, is Necrophorus investigator, which is the banded burying beetle. Closely behind that, we've got Necrophorus humator, which is the all black species, and then the bent-legged burying beetle, which is Necrophorus vespillo. The others, you know, come and go. At the moment, we're just coming to the end of carrion beetle season. So the number 1 species that you're most likely to get at the moment is the banded burying beetle, Necrophorus investigator. But I'm really glad to hear that you're getting them at your moth trap, and please do send in your records.
Investigator is a cool name. Okay, one from Anne Viner. It says, oh my goodness, sorry, the chat is populating quickly. Can you tell us anything about carrion beetles that evolve in Australia? I think you're in mute, Ashleigh, sorry.
I can't hear you, Ashleigh. For some reason, your volume's gone.
We can't hear you, I'm afraid. No? Oh dear.
How about now?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
There was bound to be a technical hitch at some point, right? Sorry, Blanca, could you repeat that last question? I missed it.
The question is from Anne, is can you tell us anything about carrion beetles that evolve in Australia? We lost you again, I'm afraid. Maybe it would be, if you want, just don't mute.
I'm not sure why it's automatically doing that. Sorry. Sorry, one more time.
Can you hear the question?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Yeah, please. Well, you got the question. You can.
No, I missed the end part. How carrion beetles evolved.
Oh, right. Can you tell us anything about carrion beetles that evolve in Australia?
In Australia, Australia is a good one because there aren't many species. There's about 3 species. If I had time, I could go grab some from the collection. Maybe I can do that. Can I do that? They're very accessible.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
why not?
Tell.
We still got some good time. We have a lot of questions, so please keep populating the questions in the chat. Hopefully we will have time for all of them. Otherwise, Ashleigh for sure is going to give you some answers later.
This is the benefit of doing this from work.
Absolutely. You have to take advantage.
So yeah, there are not many species.
Ashleigh, could you stop screen share so that we can see you?
Oh, of course. That's a good idea. Much better. Okay, so yeah, there are just a few species known from Australia, and this is one of my favorites, Tomophylla lacrimosa. Really beautiful species. But yeah, I'm not sure if I mentioned it when I was talking earlier. In the warmer climates, there are less carrion beetles, there's less carrion beetle diversity, and that's because decomposition happens at a much more rapid rate. So therefore, you've got usually the flies that are carrion flies will be much more able to locate and utilize the carrion before the beetles do. They tend to find carrion much quicker than the beetles. So it's usually flies and then sometimes ants and even dung beetles that take over the role of decomposition in the warmer places. So I'm not certain if that's the case with Australia, but it may well be the reason for that lower diversity.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Now we're moving to the question from Jane Beale about what's the reason for the American species decline?
Yeah, I touched on it. It was previously considered to be the extinction of the passenger pigeon, which no doubt played some role in that, but habitat fragmentation is the #1 reason cited at present. So yeah, it's a species that's really big. You can see it is really, really big. This is Necrophorus americanus. So it's requiring that larger size carrion compared to some of the other beetles that would be fine on a small mouse. So it's then competing more directly with the vertebrate scavengers, and they're just able to acquire the carrion much more rapidly than the poor little beetles.
Thank you so much. Janet Hall says, a world without decomposers is a terrifying one. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
But what's known of how they evolve in relation to the food, to their food source?
Sorry, it did that thing again. Can we repeat that question?
Okay, the question from Janet is, but what's known how they evolve? Can you hear me?
No, one more time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ashleigh, you have access to the Q&A box, right? So
yes.
Can you look up Jeanette's question? It's kind of long. It'll save us.
Oh, got you. Thank you.
Yeah, so there are 2 questions in one, but very interesting also. So the question is, I'm going to read to the public, is presumably the treativores were only able to develop once there was a reliable food source for them to exploit. So there must have been a time before the decomposers. How much can we understand about this period and the evolution of the composition?
I'm not sure that I'll be the best person for this one. I mean, the work that has been done by Kai and Margaret Thayer on this is looking at the fossil record of the carrion beetles, so the ancestors of today's carrion beetles. So they did occur 165 million years ago when there was carrion resource, there was dinosaurs, so they were probably fulfilling this function then. It's not really my area, so I probably shouldn't go too much further on this. I think Margaret would be the one to ask.
Okay, well, and the next question is, have you had the chance to work with Dr. Erika McAllister, who works with me at the Natural History Museum? I think she works on a corpse flower in bloom too.
Yes, I was very fortunate to volunteer for Erika McAllister when I was between my studies, doing my master's, and then going to work at Edinburgh University. So I did meet Blanca back in the day. It was many years ago, but well, 10 years ago or something, when I was a volunteer. Yeah, right. So yeah, Erika was a big influence on me. She gave guest lectures during my master's course, which is how I found out about the amazing work behind the scenes at the Natural History Museum. And yeah, she's a wonderful advocate of flies. So I know that she's also done some trapping with blowflies at Kew Gardens on their Titan arum, which is very cool.
Thank you. Anne says, with regard to the co-parenting, is this a monogamous relationship? Will male and female raise several broods together or with one random partner?
Yeah, it's very complex. So a lot of the studies that are coming out of the universities are looking at these very, incredible behaviors with the beetles. They don't mate for life. They are not like birds in that respect. Some birds obviously do that. It is believed that in the wild, the male will actually leave slightly earlier if he's given the opportunity, and he's then going to be seeking out another mate because it's all about spreading his genes, right? He wants to make sure that he can father as many offspring as possible. So yeah, he'll go on to have several mates, and also the females too can go on to have several broods during her lifespan. So yeah, there's a lot of action going on for the beetles.
A lot of gossip and learning about the nature of these animals. So Charlotte is asking, is there a way of attracting the beetles to the garden? Leaving a corpse out or a moth trap, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely, Charlotte. Those are both 2 things that are possible. And I would actually say to anybody, if you do encounter a wild dead animal, outside of this bird flu pandemic that we're having, please just leave it in situ. There's absolutely no need for naturally occurring healthy animals to be removed from the environment. It really makes me sad when I hear that people put things in the bin. So they have to find a dead mouse or something in the back garden, put it in the bin. Leave that, just chuck it in the bush. Let nature take over, because there are insects that are going to really need that food resource. So yes, you could in your own garden, if you find some roadkill, obviously please take health and safety precautions, and don't interfere with dead birds at present, but you could do that. But you could also just go and buy some chicken or some liver or something from the supermarket. Fish works very well, and then have your own trap that way. Again, apologies if you're eating at the moment, but the best way to do this is to mature your bait. So by mature, I mean leave it in a container in a warm place and let it ripen. So give it a week if you can. I know not everybody can do this. Not everybody has a garage or a shed where they can keep this away from their neighbors, but it will really help you have a more effective trap. So it'll be really, really stinky, and it will help those beetles locate that food.
Yeah, that's actually related to the next question from David, who says, will carrion beetles feed on food? A nice slice of roast steak, for example?
Yeah, they actually really do like steak. When I worked at Edinburgh University, we would feed the beetles in the lab organic beef. They only had the best, but they won't eat cooked meat. So they really need that raw meat.
The flesh. So Tammy Horton is asking, why are they attracted to light?
It's a good question. I'm not 100% sure, but it's probably similar to moths, that they are just a little bit confused. They're a bit dazzled by that light. It's kind of interfering with their navigation. So obviously many insects that are active at night are using the moon to navigate. So it's possibly that. And the reason that they're attracted to light is because most species are nocturnal. We have one species which is day active, which is the common burying beetle, Necrophorus vespiloides, the one that you can recognize because it's got all black antennae. And the other kind of crepuscular, they'll be active at dusk, but mostly nocturnal. So they're attracted to this big, bright, dazzling light.
Okay, thank you. George, student associate, says, are Necrophorus keystone species in areas where they are becoming rarer? What other tags are filling the available niche, and what are the observable ecological impacts of burying beetle populations decline?
That's a really hard one. It's a really hard one. So obviously there are the other decomposers like flies and some other beetle groups that will help fill some of that niche, but not all. I think something really important that the beetles do is the physical burying part. So other insects will remove the flesh, but that's purely through consumption above ground. But by actually burying it, it's helping immediately get that nutrients closer into the ground. And there has been some research that shows the benefits of this process on plants too. So plant diversity goes up incredibly with the nutrients that the carrion provides. So I'm not sure that I've answered your question there, but it's a complex one. There's much more work that needs to be done in this area, and there has been some really cool studies in Northern Europe that's looking at this. We've got problems in the UK in that we have the restrictions, legal restrictions on what can be left out. So wild animals are fine, but livestock are not allowed to be left, not allowed to be buried. There are clear guidelines on how they should be removed from the environment. So it's quite tricky to implement some of these studies.
Yeah, well, so the role they fed other animals, isn't it? So quite important. So Ben Wilson is asking, I recently came across some carrion with a decaying fungi. What is the attraction, and what do they gain from the fungi? Thank you.
Oh gosh, I don't know. That's not one for me. I really know very, very little about fungi. We need to call my later.
It's okay. Aditi Mishra is asking, could you please name your podcast again, please?
Oh, there was a few. So I have been on the UK Wildlife Podcast. I have been on a brilliant podcast called Grubbing in the Filth, which is purely about invertebrates. I've also been on one called Into the Wild with Ryan Dalton, definitely one to check out. And if you want to have a laugh as well as learn some cool natural history facts, then check out How Many Geese, because that's a really fun one to listen to.
Okay, well, I hope you have taken notes. Martina has asked one who's already responded, which is the Carrion Beetles mating for life. We have only 9 minutes left, so I'm going to go a little bit quicker to the questions. Julie is asking, how is color and pattern related to function, please?
Color and pattern. Yeah, that's something that hasn't been totally explored. So obviously, it's believed that the burying beetles have that striking red color as aposematic coloration, like very much like ladybirds do. Yeah, so it's the red warning color to tell other things not to eat them. But I'm not sure how much work has been done on this. I had a colleague that proposed that these beetles even were responsible for some sicknesses in horses that accidentally eat these beetles. There's definitely no weight behind that, but yeah, they don't seem to be heavily predated on. So that is successful, but then why do we have a species that's just entirely black? And also with the fact that most of them are nocturnal, are those colors visible to predators anyway at night? I don't know. Yeah, something to be explored. As for the iridescent color, I have no idea why something that feeds on carrion needs to be so glamorous. Another really puzzling thing is that one of our small carrion beetles that just feeds on carrion above ground, it has iridescent wing cases, but on the underside. So you would never see them unless you were viewing the beetle from below as it flies. But yeah, very dazzling.
Well, it's very intricate ecological, evolutionary patterns on coloration of insects across. So yes, so many to study. Richard is asking, can you please elaborate on your mention of parasitoid carrion beetles? And are there any UK species that are parasitoids? And what are they parasitoids?
Sadly not. I wish that we had a parasitoid burying beetle in the UK. We do not. This is a North American species called Necrophorus pustulatus, and it has very bizarrely evolved to utilize snake eggs. So it will lay its eggs in a nest of snake eggs, and then its larvae will develop in the snake eggs and feed on the developing snake embryo. It's amazing. There's some time-lapse videos on YouTube which you should check out. Necrophorus pustulatus. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
Thank you. We almost running out of time, so we just have the last questions. I'm going to go quickly. I'm going to go for Robert, the next one, and I go one for Julie, but we already answered one. For the endangered species, is the lack of carrion or quality of carrion other factors causing that decline? We lost you again. Would you like to try again, Ashleigh? No, no, we can't hear you. Oh gosh. No. Can you hear me now? I think you lost it. Wait, I think now? Can you try again? No.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, you're back. You're back.
I can't hear you. Oh gosh, this has been awful. Sorry, everyone. Got you.
Yeah, you got the questions in the chat anyway, in the questions and answers.
Which one?
So we're reading the one from Robert for the endangered species. If there is a lack of carrion or quality, which is causing the decline of those endangered species.
So size is an issue. So if they haven't got the carrion of the right size that they need, so size is important because they need a certain amount of resource in order to successfully get their brood of larvae through to full development. So that could be one thing. Lack of carrion quality. Another thing will be if they encounter carrion and it's actually been compromised. So unfortunately, we are seeing like evidence of poisonings happening, whether that's of birds or other animals, even using things like slug pellets, obviously terrible for our hedgehogs, but then equally terrible for the carrion insects that are going to feed on those hedgehogs. So yes, all these things are passed up the food chain. So yeah, there's definitely issues there.
Okay, we have a couple of more questions. So Louis is asking, from DNA work, it is possible to see what dead animals they have been eating.
Yeah, I haven't looked into this, but it totally would be. I'm sure it would be, because if it had been recent enough, that material will be present in the insect's gut, so that could be extracted and yeah, potentially sequenced. It all depends on the preservation. As us working in museums all know, preservation is a important one when it comes to extracting DNA successfully. So all depends on the preservation.
Mm-hmm. And Brenny is asking, are there any carrion beetles that specialize on certain corpses? Yeah, and it's more of a size class preference.
Yeah, as we've mentioned already, certainly with things like the American burying beetle, it is. In the UK, generally our larger species, so the Undertaker, the all black burying beetle, and also Necrodes littoralis, another big one, they tend to go for the larger carrion, so things like badgers and deer, rather than smaller ones.
I will skip the question for Anne, which is related to other animals being poisoned, as we just spoke. Charlotte is asking if there are they around all year or in more clement months?
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. So we are just approaching kind of the end of carrion beetle season. We have got records from across the seasons, but I think some of these are when people are finding them in their overwintering stage. So most of our burying beetles overwinter as adults, as do many of the other non-burying species. There is one that overwinters as a pre-pupa. But yeah, they'll tend to be kind of putting themselves to bed, if you like, around about late October, early November, and then you won't see them until potentially March next year.
Yeah, that's related to the next question from Charlotte, which is asking, from Perry, if it's too late this year to set up a trap.
No, I would say that you're just in time. So light trapping would be a great way of doing it, but you could also set up a bait trap too. So it would be Necrophorus investigator, the one that you would probably most likely get, but also maybe Necrophorus vespaloides. But good luck if you do. And yeah, feel free to get in touch for some advice, or let us know if you are successful. Send in those records.
We got the last question, but it's related with the iridescent wings adaptation. But I think we can leave it for later if you want, or you can deal with that in the next 1 minute we have left.
This one's from Mike saying that there could be iridescent underwing be an adaptation for camouflage against the sky. Yeah, I have a colleague that had proposed the same thing, potentially, yes. So when viewed from below, it's sort of blending in with the sky. It's very sparkly and dazzling. So it would have to be a good sky.
Okay, Ashleigh, well, with that, we finish all of the questions. Well done for answering, and thank you so much, everybody, for sending so much questions, so much interesting questions. It's a fantastic topic. It might be gross, but it's not. It's just fascinating. And thank you, everybody, for listening, and to Ashleigh for coming to the Linnean Society for the lectures. Please keep looking for more events like this, and please join us for future lectures. Thank you so much.